Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention, maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. Breaker 19, this here is the voice of Gord. How y'all doing? I hope the road ahead of you is clear, the four-wheelers and smokies are to a minimum, the chicken coops are closed, and you make it through the rest of the day without too much trouble. Thanks for tuning in. Before we get to the show today, just wanted to clear out a little housekeeping, make some announcements. The show is being released on Tuesday, September 5th, year of our Lord 2023. Later on that evening, I'll be recording with the modern American philosopher and writer Matthew B. Crawford, whom you might know from shop class as Soulcraft, The World Beyond Your Head, Why We Drive, and the Arcadelia Substack. Really looking forward to this conversation and getting it out to you as soon as possible. While I'm recording that conversation, I'll be having a returning guest to the show, Mr. Brandon Daly, mechanic, seminary student, and all-around awesome guy whom you might remember from a previous episode discussing parts and work and various things related to the writings of Professor Crawford. Speaking of Mr. Brandon Daly, I will be on a road trip with him later in October to a conference being held by these folks called Front Porch Republic, who are having Paul Kingsnorth and a number of other writers and thinkers speak at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I believe that's October 20th or 21st. If any of y'all are going to that, I look forward to meeting you. If you're not, you should check it out. I'll provide a little link to Front Porch Republic's website in the show notes. Speaking of other writers and other peeps and peoples I'd like to see, some of my listeners, comrades, fellow writers, potential guests to the show are real bad at answering their emails. Man, it's a whole lot easier to try and book guests and organize things if I sort of know what's going on with folks. I don't know about y'all, but you ever go on a website and they have no contact details to get a hold of the business or the entity or the person you're trying to get a hold of? No phone number, no physical address, no email address, but they have some kind of contact us thing where you put in all your information and then 99% of the time nobody ever gets back to you? Well, I guess they must not want your business or they're just busy or whatever, but that's super frustrating, and so are unanswered emails. Get to it. All right, today's episode features Twitter Anon, Mr. Michael Thomas of Sharon, who's going to talk with us today about the political and economic idea called Distributism, which I first heard of from another Twitter Anon a couple of years back named Fredo, whom you guys probably know from the Good Old Boys podcast. He appears on that quite frequently. Good guy. And Mr. Thomas of Sharon is also working very hard with what's something called the Catholic Land Movement, which I'd also never heard of. But I find there's some connection between distributism and how the trucking market is sort of structured, and how there's lots of small family-owned companies and owner-operators. That's only about 50% of the market, or I should say 50% of the number of the trucks on the road are owned by small companies. And I think we should get back to that, and we should apply it to other areas of life. And I wanted to have Michael on to explore what distributism is, where it came from, how it functions, what are all of its positive aspects. And we had a very lengthy, nearly 2-hour-long conversation, and it was very, very informative. And you guys are going to enjoy this quite a bit. As always, if you agree with me, disagree with me, want to send me hate mail, want to contact me, want to answer your emails, my email address is gordylocks@protonmail.com, usually down in the show notes. Would love to hear from you. So, all right. Well, without any further delay, let's get to Distributism with Michael Thomas of Sharon. All right, g'day everybody, and welcome to another episode of Voice of Gord. I'm Gord, and this is my voice. The other voice you're going to hear today is a very interesting young man I came across online, as so many of my other guests, in my quest to find out more about the world. And he has very graciously decided to join us and share his thoughts on a very peculiar socio-economic political model that not very many people know about and that I am quite curious about, and I think you guys will find very interesting. He's also a cider maker, a devout Catholic, a father, I think, of 5 children, lives like myself in upstate New York, very active on Twitter. Would you please welcome to the show, Mr. Michael Thomas of Sharon?
Oh, thanks, Gord, for having me. I'm happy to be here and grateful for the opportunity to talk to the folks who are tuning into your podcast or session radio show. I don't know quite what it is, but I'm happy to be here and happy for the opportunity. And yeah, it's a great introduction. Schoharie Valley, been here for about 10 years on that homesteading thing. I got the pre-COVID jump on homesteading. 5 kids, you got that. And yep, I'm a traditional Catholic. Very happy to be part of a diocesan Latin mass. And
do you speak Latin?
Only when I pray. If we want to pray later, I'd be happy to introduce it. So, but only when I pray.
Well, maybe we'll close. Maybe we'll close out the show that way.
yeah. Let's close out the show with a couple Latin prayers. Yeah. That would juice me. I'd be happy.
My father was a lapsed Catholic very early on in his life. I don't think my grandpa practiced, but my grandmother was sort of an Italian Catholic. Born in Canada, but her family was from Italy, and they immigrated and worked in the nickel mines up in Sudbury, Ontario. I don't know very much about it because, like I say, my dad lapsed before he ever met my mother, and it was never a fixture of our life. Like I sort of knew about it, and my noni's sisters and family and cousins, they had like the little Virgin Mary mini temples all over the place, and I knew that my grandauntie Ginny went to church and was very active with it in Sudbury, but like I only saw those people a few times a year, and we were disconnected from it, and my dad never spoke about it very often. So
no, that's very similar to me. My parents, bought into the boomer materialist set and left the faith, and it was mostly my grandmother. I have this the same thing, and I have these memories of my older Italian grandmother in her black dress. She was in mourning for like brothers she had lost the entire time I knew her. So my grandmother, she would take me by the hand. We would light votives for her brother, and she would whisper her Ave Marias. And so when I started to track back towards the faith, like the only prayer I knew was Ave Maria, So I would just be praying Hail Marys and that whole process, Mary, that Our Lady carried me back to a deeper understanding of my faith and kind of like picking up over that gap of a generation, the gift that my grandmother had carried for us. And so it sounds like, your set is very similar to mine, and I think very similar to like most people, not most coastal people who have that immigrant like 100-year America thing going on. Italian immigrants, Irish immigrants. We all kind of come from that Catholic background where it's like, yeah, our parents got wrapped up in post-war materialism, but prior to that, our grandparents were likely pretty devout. And so we're just kind of picking up that generation gap, many of us Catholics. And so your experience isn't too far away from what I experienced and where I picked it up from.
Right. So there's a gentleman who's a mutual friend of ours, Andy, Mr. Shagbar Kick on Twitter. He's been on my show a couple times. We were discussing his Catholic faith, and he asked me if I was a believer or not. And I said, oh, I'm free agent of sorts. I used to be like a Reddit tier atheist. Very, very bad, very poor negative attitude towards religion, which I've took a long time to grow out of. But like I'm not sure where I'm at. So, but he did say, well, I'm Catholic, so I'm concerned for your mortal soul. and I'm gonna pray for you. I'm like, all right, sweet. Thanks, Andy. Good.
Yeah, right on, Andy. Right on. I think he's like I keep on following him. I know they got you, they booted you off. So you might not be able to like keep up, but he seems like he's doing well, maybe even found himself a lady out west. So God bless Andy. He's a great fella. And I haven't ever seen him on your podcast, but yeah, no, he's a great guy.
Yes, indeed. So you said your boomer materialist parents, which is to insinuate that like you had to come back to it on your own.
Yes, yeah, I'm a revert. So like, all of my Catholicism, is mostly cultural. Like they sent me to Sunday school, I got baptized for grandma, we did the confirmation, I got a couple dollars. It was all great, but there was no grace at the table. There was no deeper discernment of like what what the faith is actually offering us, or the questions that it answers. And so it wasn't until like this long wandering in my life where I began a path of discernment that led me back to the ancient faith. And it was kind of like, I can talk about my conversion, because I guess that's where we're going. So my conversion kind of unfolds over like a decade, or rather not conversion, but reversion. So like I said, like I'm like a cradle Catholic, but it's very cultural. It has no deeper ping with me in like my intellectual life or my spiritual life. I'm just kind of coasting along, figuring things out, as many of us are. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. Oh, that sounds right. This sounds right. Sure. It wasn't until I actually got out to land. I moved. I'd spent some time as a paramedic in an inner city, and then that caused me to like be like, man, I want to retreat from this in a type of like Benedictine way, although I wouldn't have recognized it as that at the time. But like, boy, I want to get away from the things of man and like get out to some country. Got out to some country a little bit over a decade ago, and that I was circumstances afforded me the ability at that moment to kind of just be on the land. So I was reading old books and exploring thinking and thinking about social issues and spiritual issues and planting trees all day and just kind of having this very gentle, nice life out on the landscape. And increasingly, I kept on finding, whether it was like the things of the mind or the things of the work of on the land, or the things of like the spirit and prayer and meditation, I kept on finding them like routing me back to Catholic thinkers. And so I'll start with the intellectual life, and that like always been very interested. We're going to get to this in a little bit about distributism and social theory and economic theory and all these things, and making my way back from the idea of like localism. Okay, where does the modern kind of contemporary idea of localism come from? Okay, that finds its roots in a type of like appropriate technology movement of like the 19 actually our contemporary localism finds its roots in like the anti-globalization movement of like the 90s and early 2000s, which was very involved with labor and likely your trucking scene. That finds itself seated in the appropriate technology movement of the 80s and 70s. That finds itself seated in like a back to the land ethic of like the 60s and 70s. That finds itself seated in a like Father Fahey kind of discernment about liberalism in the 40s and 50s. Prior to that, we find the Catholic land movement, like the body of social thinking. And going back the other way, I can be like Chesterton, Belloc, E.F. Schumacher, Kirkpatrick Sale, then all the doomers of like the early 90s and the peak oil people. Who are they? Greer and all these people, John Michael Greer, and then you get into like the contemporary doomers and localists and all those people. And so there's this very like clear intellectual lineage back to Catholic social teaching, and really the reintroduction of Catholic social teaching in response to the modern world, which finds its seat in like Rerum Novarum, which was an encyclical by Pope Leo XIII. We're going to return to all this stuff, but it's kind of like me talking and saying like, I had this intellectual life where I was reading all these books, about ecology and life on the land and land ethics and appropriate technologies and all.
Right.
And
So it's a deep rabbit hole not brought to you by the internet, but just by reading books.
yeah. And then it leads me all the way back to like Catholic social teaching, right. The very core of all of it is Catholic social teaching. And so with that, I also have like another side of my life. I'm out on this farm, I'm planting trees, I'm hanging out. It's like very nice. I'm reading classics. And a lot of classics are dealing with like the discernment of virtue, the discernment of truth. And when I say classics, I mean like what they mean by classics, like, Greeks. And so I'm reading Aristotle, I'm reading Plato, the nature of reality, truth, what does it mean? What's virtue? All of these types of considerations, and I'm finding at its root this powerful and intense answer of a Christian theology that eventually all these ancient ideas and these noble pagans with all their thinking find a resolution in what Saint Thomas Aquinas gives us, in the Summa and other places. We get this kind of like wrap up of like a Christian theology as an answer, and ultimately, without all the name dropping, God as an answer. And so God the Father emerges for me as like this ancient philosophical discernment that's been hard earned through time. And that's kind of my first turning, is like I'm out here reading and reading and reading and reading and reading. And I'm like, whoa, like God exists. Like that's like a real concept. And philosophically, I kind of can't escape it. The more I read, the more I realize that all these guys who are a lot smarter than me are like, you can't escape this. Like God exists. And
Right.
so
And when you say God exists, you mean like my old, like I say, Reddit tier atheist voice in the back of my head is screaming out for definitive compartmentalization between God as concept, God as prime mover, God as everything which surrounds us, which might be cringe. I don't know. And then
no. All those, you got it. All those discernments, right?
right.
They
And
they,
then and then what, and then after that you get people who are like, well, what about the metaphysics and the metaphysical claims, and they get hung up on all that rather than what I just listed.
exactly. So like God is the prime mover. My rhetorical jog that I always like to run people through is like any subject that you dig deep on, whether it's soil or language or mathematics, pick me any topic and you're going to arrive to a place of mystery where you're like not going to be able to discern further. And then take any, so that's the origin. And then take it any analysis to its resolution, and you're going to end in like this infinity of like complexity. And so God exists, in that infinity of like on both sides of the question of anything, you find God. And so this real intense, like ancient kind of philosophical understanding of God emerges for me. And I'm like, I can't deny it anymore. Sure, I'm some type of vague deist, like I don't know what I am. I'm some vague theist. Like God exists. Let me listen to what everyone says about that.
I think that's about where I'm at right now.
Fair enough. So then I keep working, and I keep on working, and like I'm like, planting trees and continue to read, and then my reading kind of gets more maybe modern, or I'm reading social theory and back to the Catholic social teachings and stuff. But then I'm also working a lot. I'm planting trees. I'm learning like how to grow things, soil. Like I was grown in a vat in Long Island. Like I have no idea about like farming or anything like that.
A vat in Long Island.
yeah, totally. So I have my dad was a trucker. So there's my connection to your podcast.
Oh, no, it's just another thing I've noticed. So, I've lived in upstate New York now. Like, full disclosure, I'm originally from Canada. Married a lady from here. Have been living in upstate New York full time since 2016. My father, totally coincidentally, married his second wife, who's from near Binghamton, and he lived here for 10 years, had two more kids. So my brother and sister are down here. So I have this like long history in upstate New York. And throughout all of that time, when I was visiting my dad, trucking with my dad, living here with my wife, traveling around, passing through trucking. Everywhere you go in upstate New York, every valley, every forest, every small town, no matter where you go, there's some refugee from Long Island who lives up here.
Yeah. That's me. I'm the refugee. I'm like 20, like 3 years a refugee. So I feel like I earned a little bit of dirt under my nails.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm from Long Island, and my dad being a trucker he had a Boar's Head route. Before that, he drove oil trucks. So it was a box truck. It wasn't a rig, but it was like,
Yeah, no, fair enough.
he was
He
yeah,
was
yeah.
he was in distribution and logistics, and good for him.
Yeah, there you go. So in any event, my life on the farm continues after this. I'm reading all these ancient texts, right? And I'm like, whoa, God is real, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and then I'm grafting apple trees and making hay and watching sheep grow and butchering them and eating them and like having this whole homesteading life. And I'm like, wow, there's like this force that's moving through everything, right? There's like a life force that I'm plugged into that somebody else who isn't plugged into has like a much weaker understanding of like reality. And I began to like be able to see and really like witness this force of life moving through everything I saw, and it was like I couldn't shut it off. Like I was like I'm functioning on a different wavelength than a lot of people, and so that was the second kind of turning for me, where I was like, wow, modernity offers us this very disconnected understanding of like who we are and what our place amongst things is, and how like things are moving in this world. And there's this great mystery that's like kind of unfolding all around us, and it's beautiful, and we need to plug into it. Has nothing to do with books, has everything to do with like a very lived experience. Still, though, not Catholic yet. Still, so now I got God, the ancient philosophical God, and then I have like God, the green power that's moving through the earth. Not to sound too much like a hippie, but like that's the second thing I see that kind of blows my mind.
At this point, as you're coming into this transition in your life, are you married and are any of your children born yet?
Oh yeah. I got a wife. I got 3 kids at this point.
Right.
So I'm moving through my life and doing my thing. I'm paying my mortgage, going to work, doing my thing. But like, having this like kind of slow, and this is over like more than a decade, right?
Right.
But I think my reversion story is important for your witness, and maybe your audience will find it. You gave me free permission to drink and ramble before I started.
Yeah, carry on. I was just trying to like frame where you were in your life, because like, you know,
I'm like 32.
I think you'll agree with me about this, and this is something I'm trying to relay to my 2 siblings who have yet to have children and have firmly stated they're not going to. You know, having the responsibility of a partner in life, your husband or wife, and then children, and the continuity of life, like that changes your frame on things.
Yes.
And if it doesn't, then I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
And back in my Reddit atheist days when I was younger, I was also an anti-natalist. What a coincidence.
Yeah.
And the continuity of life that you take part in going forward is also a mirror to everything that's come before you, which is all of these books, the wisdom, the philosophy, everything else, right?
Yep.
So like
Yep.
we're going in both directions at the same time, and it's hard to go in those directions if you're not taking part in at least one of them by having kids.
Yep. Precisely. Right. So like having kids, my wife's like having home births. I'm raising kids. Back to that second part that I'm talking about. I'm just kind of like saturated in life and the responsibility of fatherhood and the day-to-day stuff. And it's anybody who's been there understands the transformative power of life. When you get closer to life, kids, the landscape, raising farm animals, the closer you get to that stream of life, the more you're transformed as a person. And the more like you hold on to that stream and take responsibility and stewardship, whether it's in fatherhood or the husbandry of animals or the stewardship of land, the more powerful your transformation is, which I think is what you're speaking to. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like totally, you exactly. And so there's that second part, right? That life energy. I keep going, chugging along. I got my old books. I got my like, wow, there's this whole, force thing going on around me. And I decide that, wow, I should start praying. I should start praying regularly. And what prayers do I know? I don't know that many prayers. What's a prayer I can say? Oh, right, my grandma, that old lady in the oh, right, she taught me the Ave Maria. So Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominis tecum. I would start praying while I was gardening, while I was planting trees. I would pray. I would pray and I would pray and I would pray. And it was just kind of like a cadence to keep me going while I like performed all the other stuff I was doing. A lot of my work was like all by myself. So I just started to have a prayer life. It just like kind of happened. I just began, that prayer life naturally led to a contemplative life where I was like, okay, I prayed it all out. There's all these intrusive thoughts. I was just saying on Twitter today, like, oh, you guys are talking about this Barbie movie and stuff. Boy, you guys just got to like pray more and knock all this crap out of your brain. Like all these intrusive thoughts are like, so yeah, do you have like any means to like knock the modern mind worms out of your head? So anyway, I thoroughly knocked the mind worms out of my head, and you're left at that point with this kind of blank slate where you like can witness things. And so I took to a contemplative life where I was like, I'm going to spend a half an hour, 45 minutes. I might just sit and like watch a tree or watch a field or watch a fox or, check out the sheep or watch a beehive kind of move, And so this contemplative life and witness of nature emerges for me. And one point I'm sitting and I'm looking at this old oak tree and I'm like, wow, what would I feel like if I was that oak tree? When you're just in a contemplative mind, you just like think of things. You're like, oh man, what would I feel like if I was that old oak tree? What would I, okay, so I'm the old oak tree. What do I feel like? And I spread my big oak arms out and like I stand up straight and a little crooked. And I'm like, wow, there's like bugs eating it and chipmunks digging in it and crows pecking at it. And I'm like, boy, that oak tree is in an immense amount of pain. That it looks like it's a miserable experience, but all this life is pouring out of this thing, so it's just this wellspring of life, but the tree itself is like half dead, eaten, branches dying, falling off. It just looks horrible. Really, if I was the oak tree, I would feel an immense amount of pain, but wow, look at all these things around it. And like, bam, Christ hits me as like a real thing. There's this third aspect of God, which is this sacrificial process that embodies all the other two elements of like that movement of life and what it takes to move life, but in the physical sense. And if we're fathers or farmers or other things, we understand the sacrificial element of like moving life and what it takes from us. And so this like very, very powerful witness of Christ emerges on me. And at that moment, I'm like, okay, I got a philosophical God that reaches to like infinity and ancient mystery. I got a living force that's like moving throughout everything. And I got this sacrificial manifest in the physical that is the physical embodiment of like the other two. It's a Trinity. Oh, I'm Catholic. I'm Catholic. Oh, a bunch of other dudes have like figured this out way before me. I'm just an arrogant punk and I should like acquiesce and just, suck up some humility and read what better men before me have thought. And so that was my reversion. The sacraments and all that stuff like follow afterwards. And like I kind of catch up and understand that, modernity is pressing on the ancient church in the same way that it presses on us in our life, that we have to like make mortgages and stuff. Like there's a whole battle going on. It's been going on forever. But my reversion is that witness of the Trinity. And then me just being like, bam, oh, I'm Catholic. That's what I am. And that's the story of my reversion. Maybe it resonates with you. Maybe, it resonates with some of your listeners, but that's how I returned to the faith. And then the past, I don't know, 3 years or whatever have been me understanding the tension of those ancient discernments and how they've carried themselves into the modern world, and understanding like where my place is in that ancient struggle. And it's like there's the SSPX and the FSSP and the Christ the King and the modernists and the traditionalists. And, you know, there's this whole thing going on in the church, just like there's this whole thing going on between the WEF and Justin Trudeau and NAFTA and Bill Clinton. And, you know, there's all those tensions exist all over the place. It's the human world. We're not going to get away from it. And so what is my role in all those struggles, and like how do I deal with it and all that? And so that's like my life in the church now, is trying to figure that out. And part of me, the process for me personally figuring that out, comes to me kind of like being like, what does Catholic social teaching say, right? So if I really believe that this Trinity is real, if I really believe that the ancient discernment of saints and all the people who carried the faith, right up to my grandmother who carried it and gave it to me, if all that's really real, if that's the actual counter to modernism and liberalism and the technocratic society, is the actual truth that Christ offers in the ancient faith that's carried in Catholicism and the sacraments, like, what does that mean? Like, what do I do? And so where we find instruction is in traditional Catholic social teaching. And so I read encyclicals kind of endlessly. And an encyclical, given I'm like farming and stuff, there's this encyclical by Pope Leo XIII called the RERUM NOVARUM, which really speaks to the rights of property, the dignity of labor. What's the third one? The rights of property, the dignity of labor. Yeah, there's a third one. We'll get to it. I'll remember it as we go along. But there's this encyclical that says like, hey, there's a good social order. This is how we kind of like look at the good social order. This is how we can evaluate the good social order. And then I read Chesterton and Belloc, the servile state, what is it? Sanity something with Chesterton, and the restoration of property with Belloc. And I begin to understand like, oh, wow, somebody kind of codified this in like an economic system 100 years ago.
Yeah, they translated the encyclicals to a sort of secular system.
Yeah, that was the idea. So they were looking at the tensions of industrialism, and they were like, all right, so Catholicism says this about the universe and the world, and it's absolutely true. How do I translate that into like a coherent reaction to what the social tides of their time, which was in their set, the social tide was industrialism, like a rapid change in the social order to push people into cities, to pull people from agrarian pasts, to take apart the old monarchies, to pour it into like these liberal republics and international trade systems and a type of like base materialism. There was a lot of different reactions to that rapid change of that industrialism laid on humanity. There was communism. There were the various republics. And then there was this little set of Catholics who were like, hey, if we were to deal and respond to these things really from a Catholic perspective, what would it look like? And they said to themselves, a good social order is one which guarantees the rights of property to the widest amount of people, and that helps them turn that property productive for their own use first. Meaning that, like, if I think of like the best social order there could be, it's the Shire. It's like a bunch of hobbits growing their vegetables and being happy with one another, and like, and people might laugh like, oh, why are we, fixated on ideals? But ideals are important, especially if they are dealing with.
You're supposed to live up to them. Like the ideal is like, that's just another way of saying a goal, right? Like you would want to do this eventually. Maybe we can get there faster. Maybe we can have it sort of now, but like work towards it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so you mentioned Chesterton and Mr. and is it Honoré Belloc?
Hillaire,
yeah. So just for people who are listening, can you give us a little brief description on Chesterton?
Okay, yeah, sure. So and I know I went like rapidly through things. I'm gonna probably like refer to at least 2 more times your permission to me that I could like ramble. So I'm rambling. But so about 100 years ago, right, the Industrial Revolution happens. Chesterton was an English thinker during that period, who wrote a lot of reactionary, what I would deem reactionary pieces to the conditions that modernity and subsequently liberalism and industrialism set upon humanity. He was also just like a gifted, you know, he had a certain like polemic, that he was a certain rhetoric. He was just like a witty English fella who could write well, you know, and wrote a series of essays along with Belloc, who was kind of his you know
Protege, partner, comrade, something like that.
yeah, comrade. That's good. That they would probably use
Well,
the
I
word.
mean, I use the term comrade on purpose because there's going to be a certain subset of my fan base who are kind of like boomer connish, or like, even if they don't want to admit it, like we all live in this milieu which is uh, influenced at least a little bit by zombie Reaganism,
Yep.
and the sort of people that would have grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh and all that crap. And they hear, you know, distributed property ownership and getting things out to the maximum number of people. And like if they took a very cursory look at the basic sort of economic structures advocated for in distributism, they would be like, "Oh, this is just socialism with a Catholic veneer, man. Fuck that." Like,
Yeah. Distributors get this all the time. So I try. If you've noticed, you were the one who introduced the distributist word. I was trying to
yeah,
dance around it. Well distributed property. So here's a quick rhetorical pass, and then I think it's probably worthwhile in the discussion to address the three tiers of like capitalism, communism, distributism. But well distributed private property is very, very different than equally distributed government property.
of course. That's a
So,
good
so
that's a good distinction and a good place to start from, because like I say, I'm willing to hear this out. I have an open mind about these things, and I
yeah.
understand the difference. But some people are easily triggered, and lots of people like to say leftoids are triggered about stuff. And
Yeah, yeah.
in my experience, boomer cons are equally triggered by things
I,
that like they don't like.
I couldn't I couldn't I couldn't emphasize enough in this discussion on how distributism, if we're just going to kind of like go whole hog and just start using the word, that distributism is the actual antithesis of communism, stronger than capitalism is. And we're going to get into this, and I'll
Oh
explain.
boy, I want to hear this. I want
Yep,
to
yep.
hear this.
Yep. So distributism is saying that a social order that guarantees you a piece of property that you can be productive on is the best social order, and that's free from the intrusion of government. That's free from the intrusion of like you having 40 acres and a mule that you can grow your vegetables on and like feed your family, and it's got a clean well. A social order that procures that for a man and a family is the goal. Capitalism's goal is a free market. It doesn't care if it condenses all of the property into one guy, as long as the free market is like rolling. And capitalism doesn't care if you keep your house. Distributism,
No, it doesn't.
right? Distributism cares if you, as a father, keeps your house. Communism wants to take your house away from you and give it to the government. So communism precludes, like immediately, it's just like, we're going to take your private property. Capitalism is like, we don't care if you keep it or not. And distributism is like, we want you to keep your house private in your ownership and productive with like fruit trees, a well, a garden, a milk cow, so you don't need any of the government bullshit, and in fact, Leo the 13th in that encyclical is like, any government that's going to stand in between a man and his ability to provide for the needs of his family through the gift of the earth that God has given us all is illegitimate. I'm paraphrasing, but he's basically saying that. He's basically saying like any system that stands in the way of you just like having some cows and a garden and a clean well is illegitimate. It shouldn't be respected. It's
Right.
secondary.
So this runs very analogous, because I also spent lots of time in libertarian world. Like that's like libertarian utopia right there, right? Like
Right.
their stated preference. It might not actually function that way. There's arguments amongst libertarians, and real libertarianism's never been tried, and all these fakers that have tons of money and don't care about anything aren't actually real libertarians. Whatever. It's all academic and sort of way out there anyway. But if you actually speak to most people that are sympathetic to that ideology, they would say the same thing.
Yeah,
You,
they
you,
want to see. Yeah, they want to
yeah,
see a type of Jeffersonian small farm utopia where
right.
people are caring for their needs. The problem with libertarians is that they think that the manifest of that is the manifest of that is worked with like trust in a governmental system that guarantees free markets and ensures like your rights in some type of bill that's enforced by the military. They have like a basic disjunct in the function of what liberty is. Liberty is not freedom to do whatever you want. And this is where the Catholicism of distributism really sinks in. Liberty is the freedom to do what you should. So it's a little bit of a different jog than like libertarians are going to be like, yeah, do whatever you want, and we see where that ends up with like the whole tranny movement. Are you like YouTube? Am I going to bust
Nope.
you?
No,
Oh,
no.
so I can just
I am a free speech absolutist, and you can say whatever you want. And if people don't like it, they can go listen to another podcast. I don't care.
Excellent. Yeah. So libertarianism ends with us guaranteeing the rights of any protected group, and that's what we see in the contemporary set of American politics. With like this, we're always pushing the front of like what's free, what's you do what you want, and it has no effect on me, and like
Right. So my friend
everybody is.
Charles, yeah, there's another buddy of mine online, Charles Haywood. He's a big proponent of his idea called foundationalism, and he calls that liberty from social bonds and unchosen responsibilities, which he views as like faulty, because like just because you're here and just because you're an individual, like you're still part of material reality at some level. You're still part of these other things.
Right.
And you can't just go running off cutting those bonds willy-nilly for any reason you
Yeah,
want.
yeah.
And
Mr.
that's
Yep, Mr. Haywood, a big. I am a big fan, but not just in. I didn't know that he was there on that front, but in other fronts that I've seen him on. Haywood is a great guy, and big. Likely from what I've seen, I'm going to continually be a big fan of the things that he puts out. But precisely, what you're saying is that liberty cannot extend to just solely the individual, guaranteed rights by some abstract constitution. Liberty is seated in like an enmeshment and a network of communion, and that communion with various things, whether it's a father, it would be like, oh, I'm a dad, but because I'm a libertarian, I can be any kind of dad I want. And like whatever I do for my kids is like my prerogative, and like there's no like base moral set. Like I can just teach my kids anything, and that makes me a good dad. I think all of us know that that's like not the case, right? Because some guys are going to put their kids in a dress apparently, or like addict them to drugs, or sell them to a slave market, or like here we go with liberalism. Like
yeah.
you need a base moral set of like what's right and wrong. There's a clear kind of distinction of what those things are, and to be a good father is to be like a good steward and move your children or your land or whatever it is towards like a glorification ultimately of God, or a glorification of what's true, beautiful, and good. And that takes limits. That takes a certain degree of like understanding what's right and wrong and like drawing a line between things. And this is where libertarianism falls short, is that it's like permissive of everything. And that's where we get the American expansion into like absolute insanity and like, complete derangement. And so Catholicism offers this container where it gives you a moral bedrock and says like, yes, there's a moral bedrock of right and wrong, but also there's this idea that God has granted each and every one of us dominion, and that dominion, like over landscape and family, shouldn't be interrupted secondarily by a state. We should be able to provide for our own needs with a like righteous enactment of our dominion, which is like a good stewardship of a little piece of property that like makes my fuel, food, water, shelter. So distributism that's what distributism is saying. Distributism is saying like, let us look at an evaluation of the social order through the lens of does the social order provide permission for and like a set of circumstances where a father and a family can meet their needs on a little piece of property. And if it doesn't, that they own, that they are the stewards of, and if a social order doesn't do that, it's fucked up. There's some kind of disruption there that needs to be addressed. You're interrupting something that's natural and beautiful if a father can't like tend a garden and feed his kids. Like if I have to go pay a crazy mortgage to some international banker, or if I have to work in a gulag to serve the state to like, get my slop for my kids, and they get collected into like a little nanny, like group or collective of, women in the longhouse or whatever it is. Like that's all messed up. That's like a disruption of the natural flow of like natural order, what's kind of right, which is a family on a piece of land tending for their own needs. And so ultimately, that's what distributism is saying, right? Distributism is saying like we should have a good social order should have well-distributed private property where each guy can take care of their family with like the gift that God has given them in the soil. If we're straying from that, we're getting it wrong, bros. It ain't hard, and that's basically it. Secondary wages to afford for our primary things is like, maybe that's not the best way to do things. Maybe a social order which allows our labor to produce primary things and which trains us in doing that is like a better thing. It all sounds very abstract what I'm saying, but it actually has like, if you like dial it down to like what would a real distributist policy look like? Well, I know you said you're Canadian, right? So I don't know about the public school system, but the American school system had a response to the Depression. One, we had an economic response where like, I forget who it was, Roosevelt, he like sent people to make like paper mache dinosaurs in the desert or something, and it
National Recovery and Reinvestment Act or something. Yeah.
So it was that was an expression of a capitalist idea of like, if we just pour more labor and if like the government becomes a conduit to like pour money into the economy will recover by investing in the free market. The free market will like up our technological level and provide a greater material like relief for everybody. So build paper mache dinosaurs in the desert. We don't care what you do. We're just going to pump you with money. We see the same type of reasoning in contemporary, a little bit different. They weaponized it, but we see the same thing in like contemporary paying out food stamps or whatever, right? We're just going to like pay you out a secondary wage from the government. You're going to stimulate the economy, and that is going to provide like a greater set of like innovation and technology, which is going to better satisfy our material needs.
Or that money gets laundered through the military industrial complex by sending weapons to fight proxy wars in Ukraine and various other places.
100%. In the modern set, this whole idea has been like, weaponized. I would say that like in our urban centers, the like handouts of government cash have been used to consolidate like voting blocks for like demagogic purposes to like make sure that like a certain set of politicians always have like a willful like voting block to
Well,
like
and it's damaging. You keep going on about like, social fabric, social order, what's good, what's right, and corralling people into ghettos and into high density areas when, last I it's only been a couple of 100 years of that throughout the
100
vast.
like 100 is
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
you know.
All right, and across the point being that across the vast experience of humanity, that this was not the case, and all of these people saying that super high density cities is the answer to all of our problems. Ooh, I don't know
Right.
about that.
No, exactly. And so with the like handing out secondary wages to like solve, this is a very capitalist mind frame. So the other solution to the Great Depression, which there's still potentially like a bit of residual. I haven't been to a public school in a while. But the second response was a group of congressmen who were like, we should actually teach people how to run functional houses, home economics. We should teach wives how to like sew, cook, domestic arts, and we should teach men how to do like basic carpentry and mechanics, shop class. And we should train them from a young age to be able to run like a functional domestic household on the family.
That sounds kind of based.
Yeah. Americans have shop class, home economics. Those are still two classes, at least when I was a kid, that they were still teaching. That was a distributist response to the Great Depression. It was saying, hey, let's ground our social order and the means and the organization of our social order in creating productive households. Let's divide them along like the various roles in the whole in the household. That we have the father who's like doing carpentry and mechanics. We have the wife who's running kitchens and sewing clothes and stuff. Let's make them as productive as possible, and that's going to solve the depression. And so we have these home economic classes and these shop classes, which still residually exist in our current public schools. Those are expressions of like a distributist answer to how we solve poverty, rather than just like, here's a bunch of money, go buy some stuff. You need some more, come back later and we'll buy some stuff. Oh, by the way, vote for this guy.
Well, that's it's also how you just highlighted that is a message in the Bible, right? um Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man a fish, you feed him for his life. Is that in the
Yeah.
Bible, or where's
I'm
that
not
from?
sure. I'm not sure if that's the Bible or I'm a Catholic, so I take my scripture on Sundays. So I'm not quite sure, but the idea that that dominion exists and that God has given us like this beautiful natural order of things based in the family and the land, that's a very Catholic and really base Christian idea. I think that would resonate across many denominations.
Well, no, and it also speaks to like there's a certain independence we all feel just from being human, and the modernity, as many put it, in its current manifestation, sort of meta level of these, globalists and corporations, and the subversion of local democracy, imposition of all these regulations, technocrats. They're trying to make you dependent, get in the pod, eat the bugs.
Yep.
Whereas distributism says, well, if the pod is 40 acres and you grow the bugs yourself, much better. But these guys, they don't want you to own things anymore. They don't want you to have
Yep.
your own individual sovereignty.
Yep.
There's a undercurrent of making everyone subservient in basically almost all modern politics now.
Yep. 100.
There's no liberation going on here for anybody. They talk a lot about it. They talk about liberating people from social bonds. Like I say, that's what Charles Haywood's big bugaboo is. but or liberation from all these isms, racism, sexism, whatever. They keep talking about all this stuff, but like the real liberation is being able to provide for yourself and being an upright, independent, self-standing person, and to
Right.
provide for your family, be a productive member of your community, and to be able to
Right.
help yourself and help other people. And
Oh,
if
I
like
love it. I
if
love
you
it. So you, yeah,
if you can't do that, if you don't know how to do that, and you're subservient to the state, how can you help anybody else?
you're hitting the bond or the like nail right on the head when you're talking about liberty in relationship to your communion and responsibility to everything around you, where modernity wants to seat your liberty with the transgression of what they would conceive as like bounds, the things you're bonded by. The modernity is always it's a very intellectual, divorced from the body and like lived experience, where like modernity is always saying like there's no base moral set, everything is mostly permissible 100%. How do things serve you boil down to like a material level, and then kind of quantified by your own personal discernment. So like modernity saying like whatever you think is true is true. How else could we define truth? Truth is shared amongst all these people. There's no objective truth. Where a Catholic understanding of reality is saying like, no, there's objective truth, there's objective beauty, there's objective goodness, and all of us, our liberty is bound to our ability to attend to those things, to actually make the true, the good, and the beautiful manifest in this world. If we do that, then we're liberated. Then our eternal souls like reach heaven, and we are liberated from the predicaments of this world, and we can actually live that like 1 foot in heaven life right here as Catholics, by like working that good order into the material world, and sticking our other foot on the other side in our prayer life, and on the other side of the altar rail, we can get that other 1 foot into heaven and carry that kingdom into this world by like attending to that. So
What
Catholic.
one foot in heaven, whilst here on earth? I think you explained that very well. Sitting watching a tree or watching a creek, just sitting there
Yep.
for an hour with a cup of tea and taking it all in. I mean,
Yep.
there's your foot in heaven right there.
Yeah, man, that brought me back 100%. Absolutely.
That's a really good way to put it. I have a little tiny little chunk of property here. My brother-in-law owns it, but we're in the process of buying it from him. And then my in-laws have like 26 acres of bush behind us. And some days I just want to sit on the picnic table in my backyard and just watch the trees wave in the wind and feel the breeze. And then as it gets dark, the little lightning bugs come out, and I just love it. I feel nothing better than sitting in my backyard and taking it in, and I don't get to do it enough.
No,
I'm
no, no.
always busy.
Yeah, absolutely. You're likely, the things that are keeping you busy are likely, right, service to some secondary market economy, so you can hold on to your property. That's some usury agent has bonded you to some debt that they're not forgiving of, and they're requiring that you like spend your time servicing their debt rather than servicing like the witness of like what is good and what is beautiful and what is real in this world. The point of you've been given this beautiful consciousness to like sit and like this gift to like sit and contemplate like this beautiful natural order and like see the harmony of creation and like sing with the choir. And like meanwhile you're just like, we all got to make like dollars to pay like some debt that's going on. And it's wrong. And modernity's whole thing of disconnecting us from the truth that God set for us in the soil and in a simple life and by the sweat of our brow, the means to like service our primary things and actually live like a very fulfilling witness of beauty in this life is incorrect. It's not real. This whole thing is just some vast giant delusion that serves a small group of people.
Right.
So
This distributist model, achieving what is true and beautiful and productive, and a glory to God, glory to humanity, the continuity of all this, making things better, uh, allowing people to have a homestead. How would the distributists tackle the seemingly insurmountable challenges we face in 2023 of achieving some kind of political or social order which honored that model and made it a possibility? Like, how do we get there? How do we get there today?
totally. Currently I'm reading a great book. Maybe I'll run up and grab it for a second. Action. I forget, some French fella. John Sharp from IHS Press recommended it. But one of the lies of the modern set is that we have to like amass and solve the problem for everyone. Like if me and Gord can't provide a solution that works for every single person on the planet, like our solution is illegitimate. Like it's not the right answer. And the truth is that throughout every age, throughout every time, there's been worries of the state. There's been plague, famine, war, civil dysfunction, slave revolts, crooked politicians. There hasn't been a period of the existence of man that's been exempt from these things. Yet in every single one of those periods, guys like me and you have sat back and looked at the creek and contemplated God and said, hey, how do I still make a good life? And with that, we've carried like the seed of good like forward. And so there's this terrible burden in modernity where like each one of us needs some comprehensive collective system and answer. In order to lead a good life, we need to like answer the problem of humanity for everybody. And I think it's awful. And I think that you and I can confront all like humanity's messed up. We're probably not going to solve it in like our period, and probably none of like our arrogant hope in any system we could devise is going to like answer the problem. But you and I can lead like splendid lives, even in the worst of hardship. Even if I get like sent to a gulag for the next 10 years because I dared to say, a man's a man, or whatever the heck they're gonna
there's echoes of other faith systems in what you're saying, right? Like,
sure. Oh, there's there's tons of noble pagans. I mean, the Catholic Church recognizes noble paganism or the existence of like shards of truth and tons of other things. Sure, absolutely. I've done
the sort of like the cyclical nature of everything, the fact that there's spaces within suffering for beauty and love, and like I hear echoes of Buddhism almost in what you're saying. And
sure.
also, yeah, there is that catch-22 where modernity requires of anybody offering an alternative way of thinking or looking at things an answer for everyone. Well, maybe this answer isn't for everyone. Maybe, and like the word distributism, like, let's remove it from the idea you're promulgating, but like, people are distributed, societies are distributed, the earth's, fairly big place, lots of room, we can experiment with different modes of living. And this is the crux of modernity, and like the issues we're facing in 2023 is that the sort of the globalists and the corporatists and the WEF and all these international NGOs laundering money for the banksters, trying to influence social policy all over the place, and global homogeneity and all that crap, are seeking like a beige sameness all across,
Yes.
which is basically evil, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
you gotta let people be.
Yes.
and they don't want to let us be.
No. No, they want to impose like a type of totalitarianism where, I'm all about, I think, I hope it's come across that I'm all about like an order of graces and a natural order that delineates authority in various systems. The father's the authority of his household. There's various authorities of like social order that we should attend to. There's authority isn't naturally bad, but totalitarianism, the idea that everybody needs to be forced to think the same way across every single realm everywhere, is manifest evil. It is the most evil. It's the most evil thing that like can be, and that is what the global technocracy is attempting to do. We have this global problem of global warming or a global pandemic, and it requires a uniformity of response and the global imposition of order that is just like does not regard local discernments, local pockets of authority. Like, nope, all that gets washed over, and like you have to march in line with like some type of global set. The principle of Catholic social teaching that speaks very directly to this is subsidiarity, and so distributism without subsidiarity is like an incomplete swallowing or enactment of what Catholic social teaching
So,
is
so
instructing.
I know what subsidiarity means, but for my listeners who might not know, can you define subsidiarity briefly?
Yeah, that goodness, if we're to manifest goodness in this world, in the social order, that we should push down the level of authority to the lowest level that deals with the problem that we're trying to overcome. So whatever problem we look at, instead of asking like the top level of social order to deal with that problem, we ask ourselves, how low can I push the response to this problem down? What's the lowest level of authority that answers this problem? I'm thinking, and of course, always the lowest level of authority in any authority structure, right? Because authority takes like that union, that communion, back to that idea of liberty being like something that's relational rather than just like a singular citizen or something. Uh, the lowest level of authority in the social order is the family. So subsidiarity is ultimately always thinking like, how do I answer this question at the level of the family? That's what, again, looping back, I guess it's like tie all these threads together back to distributism, is saying like our problem of sustenance can be pushed down to the level of family and stewardship on a small piece of land. So distributism is working in like kind of very kind of succinct harmony with subsidiarity, and saying that like a good social order is one in which a family is seated in productive property. Subsidiarity is saying like we can push the level of authority to answer the questions of our basic needs to the lowest level. And if we had a social order that was training fathers how to like plow field with ox, build their own houses, like I drive past forests, like I drive past a hemlock forest and I see all the Amish mills around me. And I'm like, why is anybody homeless ever? We could be like we could be training men to like pocket mortise and tenon, and having like mills pump out like an endless amount of 6x6, tamarack and hemlock, and just be framing houses for people like all day long. Like, yeah, sure, you have like a chip fob plant in Malta or somewhere that's like $6 billion, but like there's all these homeless people. Like I don't care about your economy. You're not serving the basic needs of people. Your economy is a failure. Let's talk about it. Like modernity is a failure. The basic needs.
Yeah, it's slowly chipping away. We've just had this coming from the trucking world. This company Yellow Freight is falling apart. We're having this negotiation between the Teamsters and the UPS, which I guess just got resolved. Um, there's been this like overcapacity of trucks on the market, and now there's tons of truckers without work, and they're selling their trucks. I mean, I just got laid off a couple of weeks ago, and
Oh, I'm sorry.
there's all this other wider stuff happening in the economy, and it's like, okay, cool. I guess the chickens of 2008 are coming home to roost.
Yeah. I mean,
And but this again, the solutions are all around us. if we would just think creatively about this stuff, and as you say, delegate responsibility to local authority rather than
Right.
have everything pushed from the top down,
And have
or convert.
policies, yeah, that actually serve families. I don't, there's this, you probably know this interview because it deals with your industry, but there's this great interview between Tucker and the Jewish guy, Ben Shapiro. There's
Right.
this great interview, and Ben Shapiro is like, Tucker, would you regulate automated trucking? Like, would you do that? Like, would you say like the innovation of automated trucking should be inhibited? Like, that's the free market at work. We're going to automate the trucks. We're going to, send the trucks up and down the freeway, and it's going to like make everything more efficient and quicker, and we can eliminate a whole thing. And then the people will exist on like, some type of luxury, post-labor economy. And Tucker just like looks at that little weasel like dead in the eyes and is just like, dude, if I could regulate automated trucking, I would do it immediately. I would do it with such, do you know like how many dudes exist like supporting their families and keeping their households running and paying their mortgages and like holding on to their property because they're like trucking and working in like logistical systems? If I could like stop the automation of those things in a heartbeat, I would destroy that like whole industry of like automating logistics and trucking, because because it serves to for all these guys to like hold their families together and hold their property together. And that's what social order is. That's the whole purpose of like society, is to like provide for people, for their families. And we've lost sight of that with some type of like societies about individual rights and the frontier of, liberty.
I wonder how much of that, the ideology behind the sort of like radical individualism and in society is like liberation from social bonds, is like a sort of manufactured obfuscation to cover. And like, I'm going to sound like a real leftist here, but like, for the logical endpoint of capitalism, where efficiency gains in quotation marks and the grinding down of profits and like people being left unemployed, like it's just covering for a system that's sort of like doomed to eat itself.
Yeah.
And
100%. This is why I love distributism as an answer, because what it's saying is like, no, the family is the most important thing. The authority of social order is good. Like a good social order is one that's like life-giving and helping people be like helping families be productive on lands and like on like pieces of private property that they own. And so naturally, I think all of us think that. Like nobody thinks that like the Dr. Octopus plugged into like his VR thing, like operating everything while everyone else starves, is like a good social order. That social order sucks.
what
And
what
nobody wants that. But that's what capitalism is driving.
what would you say to the critics of distributism and what you're proposing here, who would hearken it to a form of like primitivism, or hearkening to a lost time, like looking backwards instead of forwards? Like, what would you say to those people that have those
Yeah,
critiques?
what I would say is that the histography, the historical analysis, not to be like too heady, how do I do it in just like a very based way? The is all your technology so great? Is it also great? Your job locks you into some type of like automated performance that isn't fulfilling in any way. You don't feel like a man walking behind a plow line anymore, do you? Like, tell me, do you? No, you don't. You're not walking behind a plow line. You're not invigorated by the song of birds and the turn of the soil. Like, is it so good? Is it, my answer would be like, I'm not trying to like I don't believe in the materialist linearness of like human progression. Human progression is not like some type of material linear line where we just keep on like more efficiently providing for our material needs. if we do that, we neglect like a whole aspect of our being. And in doing that, we actually create the inversion of the service of our material needs, which I would say that's what people are experiencing now, like a deep spiritual sickness. And
Right.
they
Yeah.
don't even,
It's a holistic view. Like
right.
the person is not just the body that needs
No,
to be fed or
no,
needs to be altered
right,
to
right.
suit
Yeah.
programming brought to you from the outside that tells you what God gave you is wrong.
No, and if you try and reduce the individual to just a material set, or the human to just a material set, you neglect the very like spiritual nature of the human experience, and in doing that, you rob it of what is true, beautiful, and good. And then you get this actually materially, you get this manifest of all the evils that I just like chucked out. You get this like inversion and derangement of like the material existence as well. So no, you have to deal with the human experience as it is, which is spiritual, which is intellectual, which is body, which is you have to deal with all of those things. And so yeah, so what I would ask from the somebody who's like, oh, look at, we freed the market and we've provided the most material means for the most number of people on the planet to exist as ever before, and I'd be like, yeah, but is it good?
Is it actually producing the most
Good.
amount of good?
Is it good? Just as like very base, like very simple, like is it good? Or have we increased misery? How many miserable people are there right now? How many so I'll ask you this, like in the Middle Ages, right? Everyone's going to be like, oh, everyone died at 30 and whatever they're going to say about it, and there was plague and there was this or there was that. But how many like mystic ecstatic glorifications of God existed in the human intellect during that period? I
That's a
bet
good
a lot.
question.
I bet a lot more. I bet a lot more. you know how many people were like in like rhythm and harmony with like the beauty and natural order of the world? Maybe it was painful, maybe materially it was a little gritty, but the human side, how many people, when they laid down after praying to Saint Joseph for an entire lifetime, laid down to a happy death? How many people lay down to a happy death now? So that would be my like refute to somebody who was like, well, isn't it so much
Yeah.
better now? my
One of
my
my one of my best friends back in Canada, speaking of death, this guy named Coop, he works at a home for the aged who are mentally unwell. Oh man, I hate to use this term, but it functions as a kind of a charnel house. You're on your way out and you're being managed by people like him who've been hired to do it. You're not around your family. You're being kept alive by pharmaceuticals. You've lost your mental faculties. I don't know how much of a life it is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I on the one hand, I've slowly come around to, the sort of sanctity of life that is prioritized by people of faith, and I understand that its importance. But like a life well lived, does it mean that you just keep living for the sake of living? And modernity allows for people to continue living for the sake of living just because their bodies are still going, right? Like I know
Right.
this is a little bit of a tangent here, but like
Oh,
I
I
think
don't think it's a tangent at all.
I think it's relevant to what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. Well, here's an example. To make it very personal in my life, my grandfather didn't carry the faith. And when it was time for him to meet his death, he had stormed the beach at Normandy, had seen great suffering, and worked in Brooklyn his whole life. Just lived a life, but didn't really hold the faith. And when he met his end, it was like it dragged on. It dragged on for years. He had a stroke and he had a this and he had a that. And it was like, boy, it was like half a decade, the poor guy. And by the time it was over, he was a shell of the man I ever knew as my grandfather, the big, strong Italian guy who, he was a shell of what that was. My grandmother, who held the faith very, very well, when it was her time to go, she called the family together. She said, I love you all. It's my time to go. Please pray for me. She stopped eating. She died in like a week. And so,
Wow.
yeah. And she was very faithful her whole life, you know. Back to that, what I was talking about before about having that one foot in heaven, you know, and what the Catholic faith provides you, you know. We can talk about like human liberty and stuff, but if you do not have a base set of what is good, true, and beautiful to counter the kind of tides of modernity and liberalism and like, everything's relative. I don't know who's right. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm right, you know, and then you drift off into some vague, you know, moral gray sea. And then what's left? Materialism. Well, you know, you kind of wash up on the shores of materialism, and that's it. You know, if you ground yourself in what's true, good, and beautiful, and then it's miserable. So when you get there and you wash up on that gray shore of materialism, it's miserable. It's terrible. You're pecked apart by vultures. It takes years. You know, if you ground yourself and the truth of your human existence and that which is like true, good, and eternal, boy, you could meet any material hardship. You could be put in a gulag. You could be tortured by Justin Trudeau. You could be, you could be, you know, whatever it is. You could lose your, you could face war, famine, plague, whatever it is. But you can meet it with one foot in heaven and say, hey, like what I'm experiencing here, I need to match up to what carrying the true, good, and beautiful into this world like means, you know, and then you have that reference of Christ's witness, you have that reference to the gospel, and then you, as a Catholic, you have the reference to the sacraments to like take refuge in, which are very real things. They're not like, you know, in the Catholic faith, the sacraments aren't like, it's not metaphorical, right? It's like real. All that stuff is like your, you know, baptism, whatever. I'm not going to go through get deep into Catholicism, but once you have that reference and that one foot in eternity, you can meet whatever material set you encounter, and you can do it with like a certain degree of dignity. But if you don't, if you forsake that aspect of your human experience, like it's very hard to meet your material set with dignity because you don't have like again. So back to like, I love how you said that distributism looks a lot like libertarianism. As libertarianism is like this weird like inversion mutation of like, it gives us like a taste of what's true, the Jeffersonian idea of like all these people living on the landscape and providing for their needs, but then it doesn't tell you how or why. It doesn't tell you like why that's good. You know, you have to like decide that's good on your own for some mysterious reason. But if I'm a libertarian and my neighbor decides dyeing his hair pink and, you know, mutilating his kids is right, well, I got to respect that because that's, you know, that's his choice and it doesn't affect me, you know, and we're not related at all. And so what distributism says is that like, actually, no, there's relationships throughout the entire social order. We're responsible to them. We have a place in that, in that vast social order. And the best manifest of it that we should all work for is, you know, well-distributed, you know, private property and ultimately the kingship of Christ. You know, I'm not going to push that on your listeners too much, but like ultimately that's what we're talking about. We're talking about bringing the kingdom down, and that's the purpose. The glorification of God is the purpose of the human experience. And it, you know, modernity makes that such a difficult pill for people to swallow, and it's a tragedy that that's the case. It's a tragedy that like most of us will spend our whole lives struggling with a concept that was like kind of self-evident to the medieval mind, that like your experience was the center of the universe, and every single moment that you spent here on earth echoed in eternity and was vastly important and like spoke to the glorification of God, and like you had a chance to like rise to the choir of heaven and be a saint too. And that's just like robbed from us as you know, we're just like, I'm just some kind of citizen who, I don't know, has to vote for gay rights and like pay the economy or something. Like that's my purpose. I don't, you know, whatever they're telling you in the modern set. And so it's just this terrible robbing of all of us of like what it really means to be human. And I don't know, you told me I could just talk and ramble, so here I am talking and rambling.
I love it. This this is how you have found the numinous, the profound, the meaningful, and that's, how you have found this through the Catholic faith, and that's awesome. I love it. It's beautiful. Some people might not want to live that way. They might not agree. That's fine. Good for them. I like I say the distributism part. There was a technical question I wanted to get to, but your ranting and rambling was so good.
Here, well, here I'm going to pause you while you think on that question. Let me grab one more beer, and then I'll drink one more, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, me too. I wanted to bring it back to trucking for a minute. I just wanted to have like a sort of macro application of distributism to see how it works beyond just maintaining social order and providing for meaning, material, a good place for families. Like I want to like try and like fit it into economics.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm a trucker. This is sort of a trucking podcast. A lot of truckers are owner operators, and there's always been a tension between the sort of family farm run sort of owner operator model where one guy has one truck or maybe a couple of trucks. Maybe he's hauling farm stuff, maybe he's logging, whatever commodity you're nearby. And then there's like the freight business and these huge companies that own thousands of trucks, and they have either employees driving trucks that the company owns, or they have them in these sort of like quasi indentured servitude arrangements where they sell you the truck through a lease agreement and kind of like faking you out on bringing you to distributism, where you get your 40 acres and a mule in the form of this truck, but they hold all the cards. And it's very difficult. Only a very small percentage of people make it through that program and actually achieve it. And then at the end of it, they have a truck and maybe they made some money, the 40 acres, the, liberty, the conclusion of that project remains to be seen. How would a distributist society or a distributist sort of decentralized system speak to other components of the economy, such as trucking, maybe it's utilities, power, whatever, and manage things to like keep all of this necessary economic functions in the businesses that serve them in the same kind of model where it's a bunch of smaller businesses that are more focused on making sure the people that own them and the people that work for them can carry on with their small property, their families, and their communities rather than being part of corporate Borg.
Yeah. So it would precisely be the predominance. We would have a social order, which is enacted by government, most primarily, right? The authority in our current state is like these various republics that we all pay taxes to, and they hold, the monopoly on violence, which allows them to kind of like dictate what goes on. Your presentation of that system was, or the trucking system as you just presented it was incredibly loaded, where you were just like, there's these small owner operators, and then there's like, the technocratic conglomerate Borg. How does distributism answer that? And clearly distributism answers it by the means of production and property being well distributed. It's a million truckers moving goods and services between a million different farms that are owned and operated by people who own the land and guys who own the trucks, and deciding their own. That's the most resilient and good system, because it's going to remand the authority necessary to operate it to the lowest level, which is the trucker. Not the corporation or the international logistics company or the trade organization or whatever. So having a social order which is willing to turn the monopoly of violence instead of against the individual trucker, but to turn that monopoly of violence that is inherent in like a government against like corporate consolidation would be the distributist answer. So basically saying like, I would want, this is where like people are like, oh, distributism is communist, or like something else like this. One of the passages where people get like, oh, what are you talking about? And the answer for me, and you have to get like the more and more close, like you, Gord, are going to have a better answer for a policy that would, or a policy set that would promote individual truck ownership for smaller logistics companies than I would come up with, because you're closer and your authority is greater naturally in the realm of like trucking and logistics than I am. Does that make sense? So
Right.
like, yeah, so you would lean into those natural authorities, basically the owner, operators, and producers, and say, what set of policies can we enact through governance to like limit the consolidation of property and means of production into these like giant Borg organizations? What do I do? I'm a cider maker. So here's my answer as a cider maker and small farmer. So I'll speak to my industry. Right now, if I want to make cider and sell cider, I got to meet the exact same regulations, tax burden that Coca-Cola or Budweiser needs to meet for their plant. So like I'm gonna,
Gross. You and
yeah,
how do you do that? You can't.
I don't. So it boxes out a small producer. So if I want to enact a distributist policy for cider, what I want to say is like, hey, maybe if you only produce 500 gallons of cider a year, you're tax and regulation free. But if you produce 10,000 gallons of cider a year, you got to meet like X, Y, and Z. And if you produce like 100,000 gallons of cider a year, you got to meet, tax regulation and regulations A, B, C, D, E, F, G, X, Y, Z, all these things. That's not how our American system works right now. So threshold.
So what you're saying is that the burdens increase with scale and decrease with subsidiarity. The
Yep.
smaller your operation is, the closer you are to your own sole operator proprietorship, the less
The,
burden you have to carry.
the less regulatory and tax burden you should need to carry. That would essentially be like a very like global assessment that we can make. And what's really fun about this is that it'll make our libertarian friends happy, is that usually means the reduction of taxes and regulations rather than their application. So what in order to like put you know imagine a small farm where it was like, if you had under 500 pounds of beef, under 300 gallons of cider, under 1,000 pounds of vegetables, under you experience no taxes for any of this. That would all of a sudden invigorate diverse small farming across America, because I would want to operate like just under the threshold of everything if I was a keen producer, and the guys who could actually do that, who could produce 500 pounds of beef and 300 gallons of cider and 1,000 pounds of vegetable, they would be successful. I have no tax burden. I have no regulation. I'm just going to it frees the market. It's very funny how oftentimes distributism and its application and this question of policy set looks a lot like what libertarianism would look like, but we're servicing completely different agents. I am not servicing like the free reign of the individual. I'm servicing like the natural order of like families seated in their property, and I would limit it at that too. So if I saw anything I was doing was disrupting that, I would turn the monopoly of violence of whatever social authority there was against it. I would say, this is kind of like, not to go so back to the Middle Ages again. It's like the guilds in the Middle Ages actually had laws against production by candlelight. They were like, nah, if you start producing things by candlelight, like then people can just work around the clock, and that like depresses the value of things and like doesn't let people make enough money to pay their family on like an even production scale. I'm like, nah, nobody can like make widgets by candlelight.
Y'all should
And
be getting some sleep anyway. One of the things I think has been unsaid by yourself, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't know if it's been forgotten, but like I'm friends with this guy named Mike Lombard, and he's real big on making yourself healthy, right? and
Hmm.
health is very important to him, and he's a trucker, and he carries his own weights around with him, and he exercises in truck stop parking lots, and he does yoga, and he's a freak. But like, one of the things he understands is that when you're healthy in your body, you are more able to provide for yourself, your family. You're a better operator of the truck, you're a better farmer, you're better at everything you do when you're healthy. And modernity, working night shifts, servicing these crazy anti-human schedules for everything,
Right.
that strikes me as like attacking the human body, attacking the natural cycles of life. And I figure
One,
that's probably something you're not into either.
no, 100%. No, human scaling things, whether it's, if you're to have a distributed system, one of the things I would confront if we were to like really apply distributed thinking intensely to the trucking or logistics thing would be like, you get this automated truck that's got a computer, and the only way I can fix it is with a part from China or something else. You want to reduce the means of production, or in this case, when production is distribution. Oh, that's confusing. When production is like the logistics of moving things around, you want to like reduce the means of that production to the smallest scale possible. And farming, that means like I'm like, plowing my field with an oxen rather than a tractor that's computer programmed from Thailand. So, and the same thing, I would kind of, a really intense application of distributism would kind of confront the need for vast logistics. You'd say like, hey, I'm trying to reduce the means of production so like people can like do things as close to home as possible. And so,
There'd probably be a much less need for trucking in general.
but that would be the idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
People would be leading like a more like local, and so, that might be, challenging to someone who's like the diehard trucker, but
No, lots of people move things in a local capacity. You move hay around between fields.
right.
One guy,
Teamsters would actually be going back to being Teamsters and moving teams of horses,
right? Yeah,
there's
yeah,
like a whole there's a whole history there. So but yeah, that would be the that would be my kind of,
right. So, is
yeah.
there anyone today that you can point to, like besides yourself? You're a big proponent of this Catholic land movement, which obviously has overlays with distributism and
Yep.
the sort of articles of the Catholic faith. Are there any political parties or sort of like more organized people out there trying to sort of push this idea besides yourself?
One of my closest confidants is John Sharp of IHS Press. He does a great job carrying the distributist flame into the contemporary. He's responsible for the publishing of Catholic land movement books that inspired me. But our modern set is really, really complicated. And so, if you're going to ask me like my politics at the end of this, or like how I would sit on like the realm of like American politics, is that I'm much more like a for those well read, I'm much more of a Schmittian, and I'm just like gonna friend enemy everything, and then punish my enemies and support my friends. And so like I have a very, how do I say it, a very is pragmatic the right word? I'm just going to be like, if you're going to ask me about politics, I'm just be like, Trump 2024, let's go.
Well, I
That's
mean, I don't mean to bring it to like that politics. I just mean like, are there other people sort of working either within the system or trying to like promulgate these ideas? I didn't mean to make it like, who are you going to vote for?
Oh yeah, you said party, so I'm just
Yeah.
like, you're going to take me to party politics. I'm just gonna be like, Trump, go. But as far as there's not the contemporarily distributism has been malaligned by various factions. Even like there's like people who claim the mantle of like Catholic social teaching. I'm constantly bickering with them on twitter.com or x.com, I guess it is. But
Twitter itself can't decide what it wants to be, so it's in transition as well.
Totally. I'm zeeting now, I guess. So I'm zeeting against these guys all the time. But I don't, unfortunately, I wish I could be like, yeah, here's the guy who's writing awesome about distributism in 2023. And I unfortunately can't do that for you. There's not I would almost be like I'm going to encourage people to read old books and garden, which that's what took me back. And like if anything's over like 1946, like don't read it.
Okay.
That's kind of the answer I'm gonna throw at that. Like our modern discernment is really messed up, and there's not too many thinkers that I'm like, oh, I'm so excited by. There's various back to your word. There's various comrades I have in the current fight, and Haywood's one of them. And I could like rattle off like a dozen Twitter anons that I'm like, oh, these guys are great and their discernments are right on. But as far as like a body of contemporary work in distributism that I'm thrilled about, it doesn't exist right now. And I would just suggest people that the same problems that people face with the consolidation of property, capital, means of production in industrialism is the same problem that we're facing right now in global technocracy. And so by reading Chesterton and Belloc, by familiarizing yourself with traditional Catholic social teaching in Leo XIII and other places, like you can do well in arming yourself intellectually to kind of like affront what the modern set is and kind of call things out when they're a little bit amiss.
Charles recommends that too. Just read old books. I think even Bronze Age pervert. There's you mentioned a bunch of the sort of right-wing Twitter anosphere. Many of those people would say the same thing. Just read old books.
Yeah, read old books. There's not a lot, there's and don't just read like theory, like there's beautiful fiction, old fiction that people should read Dickens and Dostoevsky, and there's great old books, but there's such a body of it. Like nothing great is being invented right now. We've kind of lost something, and I think that in the contemporary, our purpose is to kind of like find that thread in the same way that BAP would be like, but Bronze Age, right? He's like return to a type of like vitalism, return to a type of like ancient discernment. I would suggest the same thing, and just complement it with the idea of like Catholic chivalry and a Catholic moral code, because that's like long discerned too past the Bronze Age. And so read old books. That's my answer.
Right. Well, that's a good place to leave it, Mr. Thomas of Sharon.
Thanks.
This has been fascinating. Like I say, ostensibly this show is about trucking and truckers, but I've kind of wandered off in a few directions. You mentioned Prime Minister Trudeau a few times. The man is my nemesis. I went to war online against it. I was part of the Freedom Convoy. So oftentimes this show ends up being more political than about trucking. But I'm just interested in ideas, and this distributism thing's been circulating in the back of my head as as a model, and not just for land and not just for like the family, but like organizing business. Because as soon as things scale, yes, it's good in a strictly economic sense that like you get economies of scale. The bigger you are, the cheaper things become.
Right.
You force prices down, but like forcing prices down also implies paying people less, having less money, concentrations of power. There's this sort of like bottom line thinking doesn't encompass the rest of what we need. And so I'm trying to like think about it from like, trucking as a business, trucking as a lifestyle. There's a way to do it that is closer to the heart, having a small company and having like a distributed group of small companies, right? So like the economic possibilities that are sort of implied and inherent in the distributist model are very
100%. Yeah.
interesting to me, and I appreciate this very long explainer, as the kids call them these days. And
Yeah.
this was really lovely, and I really dug it. You have an energy and a vibe you're giving off, and I can tell you're passionate and you've given lots of thought to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I hope that comes across to my listeners. Like, you mean business. Like, there's no faking any of this for you at
Oh,
all.
no, no. Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm for real. And so to bring it back to the real level, because I do feel like I just like you gave me permission. Again, I'm just going to continue to blame you. You gave me permission at the onset, just like drink and ramble. So that's what I gave you. But to bring it back to like a tactical awareness, right? Our greater strategy is to like, move people and the social order towards the kingship of Christ. But what are our tactics, right? So if the things that people have listened to tonight, if you're like, oh man, I want to take part in that, I want to like get involved, I want to like do things that are aligned with that, please check out www.catholiclandmovement.info. Lift your gifts. If you can lift a gift towards that effort. The Catholic Land Movement is all about educating Catholic homesteads, families that are seated in the Catholic faith, Catholic tradition, Catholic morality, equipping them, educating them, supporting them, connecting them with other people who are doing that work. So teaching them how to like, farm, can their food, sew their clothes, heat their houses with wood, acquire property. This is the mission of the Catholic Land Movement. And it's very, very like cabbage in the ground. I've talked a lot about like up here kind of things, shared my own experience of conversion, but like the real work is like cabbage in the ground. The real work is like connecting people and doing that work. And so I just don't want people to leave this discussion thinking like, oh yeah, that guy was cool. Like, he's like way up here. Like most of my time is spent like coaching other men to be like, hey, you got bees, you got trees, you planted fruit, you plow in a garden, like you putting fence down, you're raising animals, this is, and then connecting them with other men who are doing those things and like really cultivating Catholic homesteads. So if that mission, that very practical and very like in the ground mission inspires you, you want to support it, you want to get involved with it, you want to do it yourself, www.catholiclandmovement.info, like send us money, lift your talent to the effort. And I'll see you on the battlefield. That's, whether you're a trucker, a farmer, anybody else who's beset by the whole like technocratic modernity. We're going to win, bros. We're going to win.
And if people want to read up more on distributism, where would you send them?
There's a great book, the third way. The first very, very first thing, I don't know what the press is, it's in my library now, but look up the third way, Distributism. I bet if you Google that, you'll find the right thing. But even past that, just find Leo the 13th's encyclical, Rerum Novarum. Read that. That's the base. Once you read that and like really get it, read it twice, read it 3 times. And then like from there, you'll discover Chesterton and Belloc and everything else. So if like you left here being like, man, that guy's talking about some stuff. What is that? Read Pope Leo the 13th. That is like the base of like intellectual life that all of the distributist movement grew from.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Sharon.
Cheers, man.
Mr. Thomas of Sharon, sorry.
Thanks, Corey. Have a good one, man.
Way of the road.